Hello and welcome back to the NFL DFS Slate Breakdown for Week 8. Cannot believe it's already here. It is. It's going to be a fun week. It is another low-scoring week, but at least this week we don't have one game that is going to take a ton of the ownership. It's going to be a little bit more spread out, and it looks like a pretty fun week to attack. Now, before we get into it, come join us at LineStar. It is only $39.99 per month, and it gets you access to everything we do. All the props, all the DFS, you get it all. One low price, best deal in the industry. Come sign up, come join us. NBA is started, and it's a fun time. It's the best time for sports for the season. All right, so we got an interesting slate here. We got a big one. We got 13 games. Not much buys, no London games. It is a giant slate. What we do have, once again, Chiefs and Dolphins are the two highest scoring games on the slate. Now, the highest scoring games are all pretty lopsided. So if we look at the totals, this KC Denver, Miami Dolphins, Dallas Rams, Baltimore Arizona, those are all the highest game totals. And all the highest team totals are all kind of blowouts. Miami, KC, Baltimore, Dallas, even the Eagles are big time favorites in their games. So it's kind of interesting in that sense. One of the things that I do want to note, and I always try to note for us in this show, is the games that could be the fastest of the week. That is the Saints versus the Colts. Both of these teams play pretty quick, and the Colts have a real bad defense. So I think this is an interesting spot to attack. The other thing is the Saints let people pass a little bit. So I think that game, although the total's 43.5, is a little interesting for some pieces. Next, we got Jacksonville and Pitt. That Pitt defense is not as good as everybody thought it was going to be, and they've let guys pass on them. So I think Jacksonville is a little bit interesting. They've also, let guys run on them. So that is interesting. Then Seattle, Cleveland, kind of surprising. That's one of the quicker games. It is now. I don't think we're going to really love attacking this game. That Cleveland defense is really good. Really, knocks down Seattle's spot. But that offense does have a couple spots we can attack for the Browns. So I think that's a little interesting. And lastly, Houston versus Carolina. I love this game. I think it's super interesting. It's the first time, that Houston's a solid favorite, 3.5 point favorite here. CJ Stroud has been really good. Is their game plan going to change a little bit, though? Being handedly in the lead for a lot of the game. They were last week versus the Saints, and they didn't throw that much. And so I do worry about that a little bit for CJ Stroud and for that outcome of the game. But I think it is a very interesting game environment. So those are our fastest games. Those are our highest total games. Now let's jump in and look at ownership and see where we can, dissect a little bit as far as where we can maybe fade some chalk and go with some chalk. So no surprise, Mahomes once again is the highest owned quarterback, 18% owned. Now, it's a little high in my book, but I do think he's in an interesting spot here. It is versus Denver. It is in Denver this time, though. He did face Denver at home, went for 300 yards and a touchdown, 30 yards rushing. Just didn't really have to do much. Now, we know this Denver offense, our defense isn't good, but they've been playing a little bit better recently. But the offense is struggling a little bit. I think it is an interesting spot. I just don't love it. He hasn't really had to do much except for went absolutely nuts last week versus the Chargers. So we know that is in his bag of tricks. It still is, but I don't absolutely love the spot. Definitely not with this type of ownership. Next, we got Jalen Hurts. I think this spot is tremendous. The one thing with Hurts is he may not really have to rely on his legs much, which definitely hurts his fantasy output. He should be able to carve them up through the pass, though. A.J. Brown and Smith both look very good. And if he is just passing, you might be able to get, most of his points from just A.J. Brown or Smith. So that's one reason I don't absolutely love Hurts, but he is in an interesting spot, and I totally understand why he's going that high owned. C.J. Stroud is one I am extremely interested in. One thing I will say is with the high owned quarterbacks, he's the only one that's cheaper. So you're going to be getting a little different with that. You see Lamar Jackson as the next highest owned, and he is also in that 8K range. So paying down is a little interesting here. So almost 50% of the field is paying up at quarterback, it's showing. So if those quarterbacks fail, Stroud is a really interesting option. Another one that I like, and I went through and I kind of liked some of the quarterbacks here that I like, and I've gone through a little bit and cherry picked some out for you guys already. So I very much like Lamar Jackson. I like CJ Stroud. Didn't like him before, but I will now. I think Stroud is even more interesting with the fact that Robert Woods is out. So that tree of targets goes down a little bit. Might be a little bit easier to stack with. Lamar Jackson, I think, is super interesting. One of the things that we will see, too, for the tight ends, there's a bunch of cheap options, so nobody's really paying up. So going Lamar Jackson and then Mark Andrews gets you a little different in the tight end spot and is going to give you a little bit different of a build. And Lamar Jackson isn't that high owned. He is one of the highest implied point totals on the slate. So I think he's super, super interesting. Obviously, Tua is an every week consideration. I think Derek Carr is interesting. He's been able to put 2 decent games together, throwing for 650 yards over those 2 weeks. So I think he's in a decent spot in a game that is faster. And he has, some nice stacking options. You can go Kamara, you can go Olave, you can go to the tight ends. Jawan Johnson's supposed to be back. So I think he's kind of interesting. San Francisco spot I do like. I'm just not sure who's going to start. If it's Darnold, he is super cheap, and this system is really good for quarterbacks. So Darnold is absolutely in play if he is a go. Brock Purdy is also, we know the Bengals can put up points, and they just had a bye, so they could be the healthiest they've been all season, which is enticing. If the Bengals are able to push the 49ers, Purdy becomes a very nice asset at low owned. Other ones, I kind of like Stafford. It is against that tough Cowboys D, though. And then Trevor Lawrence. I keep going back to Lawrence, and he's just been average week in and week out. But the Steelers D can give it up, so I think he is a bit interesting. All right, so going over to running back, we got Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara, and CMC are all right around 30% owned. Look, they should be. Breece Hall's against the Giants. We got a great alert score for him. We know Breece's ability. It's a great spot, and he's underpriced. Makes sense. Alvin Kamara, similar spot. 7,300. He's been targeted just an absolute ton, and it's in a game environment we like, so I understand there. CMC, look, dude is just a machine. He is a weekly consideration. The one thing I will say here is at 9,200, we really need 30 plus, and he's only done that a handful of times so far since he has been a 49er. The one thing I will say is any week is absolutely capable of this 50 burger. So it is an interesting spot. I like him. Don't absolutely love him though. Just for the fact that we need 30. The other thing to mention though on this slate, there might not be a ton of guys that really go nuts. So getting those guaranteed 25 plus fantasy points may be a little more needed this week than most. Isaiah Pacheco, a little too high owned for me. He's in a good spot though, so I totally get it. The one thing I want to point out about Pacheco, he was chalk last week. He might be chalk again. And the thing I want to point out is his floor is low and his ceiling isn't very high. So he is a safe play. His median shows decent every single week, but he just does not have that ceiling that we really need. So that's more so why I'm off him than anything else. Tony Pollard, the efficiency that he had last year is just gone. I don't love it. If we go down a little bit, some of the running backs that are low owned that I'm interested in: Kareem Hunt, Travis Etienne, Damian Pierce, DeAndre Swift, Alexander Madison, and Amari DiMercado. DiMercado is super interesting to me. Look, they're going to be down. He had 5 targets, 4 catches last week. Absolutely ran away with all of the volume for Arizona running backs. If that's happening again, he is just too cheap for the guaranteed volume and likely dump off passes that could be beneficial to him. So that's why I wanted to bring him up. I think he's an interesting spot. Damian Pierce is one that we really need to talk to here. His workload has been so inconsistent. Devin Singletary's there. I think he is the best back, but something seems to be off, and it is the only thing keeping me from slamming a ton of him this week. I love the spot that he's in. I love the matchup, but this volume is just inconsistent, and that is holding me back a little bit. DeAndre Swift is another guy where his volume has just been insane. The matchup isn't spectacular, but he has been so good, and he's still priced moderately, and at low ownership, I'm going to take some swings. One spot we need to bring up is Zach Moss. Been questionable all week with an elbow and a heel. If he doesn't go and it's just the Jonathan Taylor show, Jonathan Taylor's pretty cheap. He will sure to be chalky if that's the case, but it's a spot to talk about there. I realized that I forgot to get over to the FanDuel ownership for quarterback and whatnot, so we'll catch up on FanDuel real quick here. All right. So, Mahomes, Hurts, Jackson. Said this on DraftKings. We'll go over it again. Chalk is paying up at quarterback. So, easy to get different to pay down at quarterback today. Or, if you do really like that lineup construction, you could go Tua and get totally different than them. And you're still, a little bit cheaper, but still in that same echelon. Similar lineup construction for the week, but different quarterback with the same type of ceiling and as the other 3 top guys. But I do think it's very interesting paying down Howell. Again, Brock or Darnold are a little bit interesting. You could even go Bryce Young. Be crazy. But the one limiting factor with Bryce Young on FanDuel is the absolutely crazy pricing of Adam Thielen. $8,200. What is he? The 5th highest priced quarterback or wide receiver is just nuts. So those are kind of, the spots. I mean, our projections do agree with the ownership. The one thing is that Tua, is right there with the guys at way less ownership. And I do not think that Jackson, Mahomes, or Hurts deserve to be like 3, 4, 5 times the ownership that Tua will be. I do not think Tua will be 1%. I do think he would be more like 3 to 5, something like that. Stroud, absolutely interesting. We went over all of that. Running back spot, Kamara, Brees, and Pacheco. So this is definitely a spot where I am off Pacheco at 34%. Just don't love the ceiling for him at that spot. And I think we could just get different and find somebody else with more ceiling and less owned. And that's probably the way that I will go. One thing that we do need to bring out is CMC, 10.2K on FanDuel, but he's going lower owned. Like I said, this is a week that we may just want to lock in, some more guaranteed points, and he is one way to do it. You're looking at 25 plus most likely, and at low ownership, it's interesting. Now, wide receivers for both. All right, so Chase, Bourne, Flowers, Brandon Ayuk, all of which are interesting. I really like Flowers this week. Bourne, look, he's cheap enough that in PPR, it makes a little sense. I don't love it. I don't know if there's the huge ceiling there, but he's a safe, cheap option, which if people are paying up at quarterback, they need that. Chase, look, he's going against the 49ers. I don't love the spot, and I am shocked to see him being this high owned. I can absolutely get off him and go to other places if he's really coming in at that ownership. Addison, after that game last week, you kind of have to look at him when he's still 5,700. He is versus a tough Packers pasty, but I'm interested still. Nico Collins, I think, is absolutely great in a just from tremendous spot. Dante Jackson hasn't been good. It's a great matchup rating. He also has been crushing zone, which Carolina plays a lot, so I think Nico's in a great spot. Drake London, Terry McLaurin, obviously Cup. Rashid Shaheed is a guy that I am super interested in. I've talked a little bit about how I don't like playing Michael Thomas because Michael Thomas is like the Pacheco of wide receivers, where kind of guaranteed 4 to 6 catches, 40 to 30 to 60 yards. But even with a touchdown, it doesn't really get there in a big GPP. And Rashid is a guy that could go put up, pretty much 0, or he can go for 20. And at his price, I think it's very interesting. And he can absolutely get deep on this Colts D. So I think he's interesting. I've said before, I like Smith and Brown. Olave, low owned, still too cheap, and very interesting. Pittman, Kirk, I like them all. I think this slate is very, very interesting, and there's a ton of medium priced receivers that I like. On FanDuel side, highest owned guys, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Flowers. The one thing we do got to bring up about Tyreek, I do love the spot for him. He is injured this week. He did miss practice. He said he was going to play, though, so you have to assume that he's going to be a full go, but just know that he got a little banged up in that last game. And who knows? Him being a little banged up is a lot worse than most guys banged up just because he relies so much on his speed. Flowers, obviously like him. Michael Thomas is here. Don't like it. Look, 14 ceiling, 6 floor. No thanks. Not at almost 20% owned. Mingo, super cheap. He's in a game we like, so consider, but I just don't love it. I think he's only this price because Thielen is so expensive. Or I think he's only this ownership because Thielen's so expensive. Ayuk, Cup. a lot of the same lower owned guys on FanDuel. Jamar Chase is going low owned here, high owned over there. Josh Downs is somebody we did not talk about on DraftKings. Should probably bring him up. 5 for 125 and a touchdown. He's been targeted a ton this whole season, and that probably doesn't stop versus the Saints, who allow teams to pass on him. So I think that is extremely interesting. Another one that I do need to bring up is KJ Osborne. I think if everybody's playing a receiver on the Vikings, it's probably going to be Addison. Now, at 6,400, I think he's a little expensive on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, he's way cheaper. And, it's a guy that we have seen in the past really be able to go off. And now teams are going to be scheming for Addison. Osborne might start getting a little bit less coverage due to that. So wanted to bring that one up quickly. All right, tight end wise. So this is what I talked about. The low price tight ends are the highest owned. Ferguson, McBride, Schultz, Hill. One thing I have to say about Schultz, he has had his really good games when Tank Dell has been out or in games that Tank Dell got hurt. Tank Dell was out these last 2 games, got hurt this game. Before that, he was almost non-existent. I think Tank Dell being back hurt Schultz big time. It is a game environment we like. I'm still interested. Trey McBride is the cheap tight end that I would be all over. The Arizona Cardinals have just used the tight ends a ton this year. With Ertz out, it could all go to McBride and under 3K. I am willing to eat some chalk with him. Ferguson, I just think is too high owned. I do like his, capabilities and his outlook. But I'm just not there. I am much more interested in going to a Kels, a Waller, an Andrews, and paying up a little bit more at tight end. You're just going to give yourself such a different build doing that. And that is likely the way I am going to tackle tight end this week. Try and go for some more guaranteed points and hope, one of those big names hits it out of the ballpark. And over on FanDuel, Kelsey is getting a little higher owned. Still not too high, though, as well as Kittle. Check practice reports for Kittle. I talked about this a lot versus Minnesota. If Trent Williams is out, which I have not actually seen anything on that yet, Kittle's asked to block more. And if that's the case, he's just not going to run enough routes to get targeted a ton. Now, he got 7 targets last week. Debo is out, so that also counteracts some of that. But I think that we have to wait and see with Kittle. If Trent Williams is in, I'm all in on Kittle. I think this is a slam dunk spot for him. If he's out, a little more hesitant. Andrews getting no ownership, and it's crazy. He's in an absolutely great spot, as well as Kelsey. So I love that. Juwan Johnson, we got to bring up a little bit. He had some really big games last year and is expected to be back, so he is interesting. I really wish they would just let Taysom Hill run the show there, but they won't. All right. Defense-wise, I mean, look, I don't love to go pick defenses out, but Seahawks, Falcons, and Houston are all appearing to be the highest owned on FanDuel. And then on DraftKings, it appears to be Falcons, Bengals, Vikings. Bengals is nuts. I would not do that. Would not recommend that. It is just that they're cheap, but not against the 49ers. They don't turn the ball over much, and it's a very efficient offense. I do like the Eagles, the Chiefs, Jags. All of those are pretty interesting to me, and I'll probably have a good bit of those 3 teams. All right, guys, so that will do it for us today. Pretty interesting slate. Tried to walk through everything pretty quickly. There is a ton of different things you can look on the site to kind of decipher a little bit more where you want to go. We do have the matchups tools. We have all the red zone stats you need. All of that will help you kind of decipher a little bit more in between targets and who you want to go with. But good luck. I'll be back next week. Guys, have a good one. Bye. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Helps us a ton.